Welcome to the deep dive. You send us the sources, we pull out the key stuff. Basically, a shortcut so you're genuinely in the know. Today, we're looking at something pretty interesting, a detailed account of that recent, well, fiery chat between Canada's Prime Minister Mark Carney and U.S. Rep. Jim Jordan on Jimmy Kimmel.
Yeah, this was definitely more than just your standard late night appearance. The source we've got really digs into, the arguments, the tension underneath it all.
Totally. And you got to picture the setting. Jimmy Kimmel Live, the El Capitan Theater in Hollywood. That grand Art Deco style, but with a modern set, right?
Plush red chairs, polished desk.
Exactly. And that huge screen, the flags, Canadian and American side by side. You could kind of feel that cross-border thing even before they started talking.
And the source mentions the audience, too, a mix of Americans and quite a few Canadians as well. You could apparently sense they were really waiting for this.
Right, so Kimmel introduces him. Carney, navigating choppy waters, Kimmel said. And then Jim Jordan, known for being, well, assertive.
Yeah, direct is one way to put it.
And visually, it set a tone, too, right? Carney in the Navy suit, looking pretty measured, confident. Jordan, looser tie, more swagger, maybe.
Definitely a contrast in styles right from the start. It telegraphed a bit of a showdown, didn't it?
It did. So our mission here in this deep dive is to unpack what was really said, the key arguments, maybe some surprising moments, and just the underlying friction this whole electric showdown brought out.
Let's get into it.
Okay, so first up, Jordan's opening shots. Our source says he came out swinging. Things like liberals are finished blaming Carney for high taxes, the housing crisis.
Yeah, and even claiming Canadians were begging for a change. Pretty aggressive stuff right off the bat. Clearly trying to put Carney on the back foot.
So how did Carney respond initially?
Well, interestingly, he didn't really match that intensity right away. He was more pragmatic. He pointed to policy moves like the plan to build 4 million homes, cutting taxes for the middle class. And then he sort of subtly jabbed back at Jordan, didn't he? Referencing Jordan's own record of, shouting matches on cable news. A way to question if Jordan was all talk.
But Jordan didn't back down. He apparently ramped it up, calling Carney a banker, playing prime minister.
Ouch!
Yeah, and saying he'd never won a real election, that Canadians wanted a leader, not a spreadsheet. That's hitting pretty hard at Carney's background.
Exactly. It's framing Carney as maybe out of touch. But Carney's reply, according to the source, was calm, but pretty piercing.
What do you say?
He brought up his own experience steering Canada through the 2008 financial crisis. Big contrast.
Right, the global crisis.
Yeah. And he contrasted that with Jordan wrestling in Ohio, and that's where the locksmith anecdote first came up.
The locksmith. We'll probably hear more about that. So it was about highlighting his experience versus Jordan's kind of subtly undermining him.
Pretty much. And it seemed to work with the audience, especially the Canadians. But then Jordan shifted gears, big economic warning, claimed Canada's economy was a wreck.
A wreck.
Wow. And that Canada would end up crawling to the U.S. for a bailout. You can imagine the tension that created.
Oh, yeah. That's provocative.
Extremely. Designed to rattle cages, raise doubts. But Carney's comeback was strong. That line, Canada doesn't crawl, Jim, we stand tall.
That must have gotten a reaction.
Huge applause, the source says. A real defense of, Canadian sovereignty.
Okay, so a fiery start. Let's move on to the tax policy clash. Kimmel transitioned here.
Yep, smooth transition. And Jordan just jumped right back in, called Carney's tax cuts a sham.
A sham? Why?
Said he was dangling carrots while piling on debt, basically arguing it was fiscally irresponsible, heading towards bankruptcy for Canada. Relentless attack.
So pure debt fear-mongering.
That seems to be the angle.
Oh.
But Carney countered, right. He laid out a plan balancing the budget in 3 years, he said.
Okay.
And he stressed the investments, like in housing, and that the tax cuts were for families, not corporations. Then he turned it back on Jordan, questioning his strategy of slashing public services.
Trying to paint Jordan's approach as harmful.
Exactly. But Jordan kept pushing, conning Canadians, empty promises, spending's out of control, buying votes, really direct attacks on Carney's motives.
Intense.
Yeah.
How did Carney handle that?
He tried to undermine Jordan again, referencing Jordan's past support for, slashing federal jobs in the U.S.
And the locksmith.
And brought back the locksmith anecdote. Yeah, trying to make that stick as an example of, bad cuts.
That locksmith is getting a workout.
Mm-hmm. But Jordan warned about a debt spiral for Canada, even said Canada should learn from America's fiscal discipline.
Which is interesting, given the U.S. debt situation.
Right. Carney jumped on that, pointed out the U.S. debt under, periods of influence like Jordan's. He framed Canada's plan as sustainable versus Jordan just making noise.
Trying to flip the script on fiscal responsibility.
Pretty much. Jordan's last shot on taxes was that the cuts were a fantasy. Canadians would pay the price. Very downbeat.
And Carney's wrap-up on that.
Focused on giving families relief, building a stronger economy, contrasting it again with Jordan's approach. Cuts that gut communities, he called it. Classic framing.
Okay, let's shift to border security. Kimmel moved the conversation there.
He did, and Jordan, well, no surprise, came in hot. Carney's borders are a joke, a free-for-all, called Carney too spineless to stop it.
Strong language. Evokes a crisis feel.
Definitely plays into that narrative. Carney's response was more measured again, talked about welcoming immigrants, but with a plan, housing, services.
Immigration, basically.
Yeah, contrasting it with Jordan just wanting to slam the door, as Carney put it.
But Jordan hit back, called him a hypocrite.
Yeah, accused him of preaching open arms, but closing the gate when it suited him, trying to paint him as inconsistent.
How did Carney deal with that?
Kind of cleverly, actually. He sort of sarcastically asked if Jordan was proposing a wall along the 49th parallel.
Yeah.
And who would pay for it? It injected a little humor, maybe highlighted the impracticality of Jordan's stance for Canada.
Gotcha. But Jordan doubled down. Claimed the U.S. would have to clean up Canada's mess.
Yeah, pretty inflammatory. Dismissive of Canada's ability to manage its own affairs.
And Carney's response to that?
Forceful defense. Said Canada manages its borders better than you manage your temper, Jim. Oof.
Wow.
And emphasized protecting sovereignty without resorting to fear tactics. Another assertion of national pride.
Jordan's final word on borders.
Just hammering the weak on security, inviting chaos angle, fear-based politics.
Think Carney.
Countered with, chaos, we're building a stronger Canada. Reframing immigration as strength, while painting Jordan as all talk, no results, trying to own the narrative of practical solutions.
Okay, now this 51st state thing. Kimmel brought this up seriously.
Yeah.
Referencing Trump's comments.
Yeah, raised the temperature a bit. And Jordan, kind of surprisingly, seemed to almost agree with the premise. Said Canada's so weak it'll join the U.S. by choice.
Seriously.
And that Carney lacked the guts to stand up to Trump. Imagine how that landed with the Canadians in the audience.
Oh, I bet. What was Carney's reaction?
Pretty direct. Called Trump's talk ridiculous. Said Canada counters with energy, trade, and unity, not cheap shots. A firm rejection.
But Jordan wasn't buying it. Skeptical about Canada pushing back.
Not at all. Predicted Canada would pay the press.
Yeah.
Basically arguing the U.S. holds all the economic cards.
Standard power dynamic argument.
Right. But Carney pushed back hard. He highlighted Canada's leverage supplying critical resources to the U.S. Oil, power, uranium.
The resource leverage.
Exactly. Implying Canada isn't powerless against tariffs or pressure.
Then things got weird. Jordan called him Voldemort.
Yeah, that was out there. Called Carney Voldemort, leading Canada to ruin, claimed Trump had him cornered. Very theatrical.
How do you even respond to that?
Carney's comeback was quick. Voldemort, take a look in the mirror, Jim. Turned it right back on him, asserted Canada's strength. Pretty effective, actually.
Wow. Okay. Jordan's final point in that section.
Back to the core argument. Canada's economy needs America, can't escape that dependency.
The fundamental debate.
Exactly. But Carney insisted it's a partnership, not dependence. Pointed to Canada diversifying trade globally. A different vision.
Okay, let's talk about a point where maybe Carney stumbled a bit. The carbon tax issue. Kimmel brought up Carney scrapping the consumer carbon tax.
Yeah, and Jordan pounced immediately. Accused Carney of ditching it because he was scared of angry voters, said he lacked spine, principles.
A politically tricky spot for Carney then.
Definitely. Carney explained it as a shift towards green incentives, focusing on results, not dogma, trying to navigate that tightrope.
But Jordan kept pressing?
Oh, yeah. Interrupted, called Canada's energy policy a mess that people are paying for. And then, interestingly, Kimmel seemed to chime in with some skepticism about scrapping the tax, too.
Really? Kimmel sided with Jordan, kinda.
Seemed like it, at least expressing doubt, which put Carney in a bit of an awkward spot. Jordan seized on it, claiming Canada would never be an energy superpower under Carney. All talk, no action.
Challenging his environmental credentials directly.
Mm-hmm. Carney hardened his tone then. Contrasted Canada's clean energy goals with Jordan's fossil fuel fantasies, talked up Canadian innovation, tried to regain the high ground.
But Jordan hit the cost angle again.
Yeah, argued Carney's policies were driving up costs people couldn't afford. That classic tension environment versus economy.
And Carney's defense.
Tried to link his other policies, tax cuts, housing, to easing that burden. Framed Jordan's approach as backward-looking, propping up the past.
Okay, moving towards the end game. Canada's global vision amidst those tariff threats. Kimmel focused on that.
Right. And Jordan was blunt. Canada has to bow to America's terms. Carney has no leverage. Very dismissive.
Same theme of U.S. dominance.
Exactly. But Carney painted a different picture. Emphasized diversifying trade, Europe, Asia, global partnerships. A vision of Canada not just tied to the U.S.
Jordan's reaction.
Scoffed. Called it dreaming. Claimed America would crush Canada's economy. Just doubling down on the negative prediction.
And Carney's counter.
Stood firm. America's not the whole world. Pointed to actual trade deals with the EU, Asia. Trying to show Canada has options, agency.
Jordan's final word on that, just more negativity.
Pretty much. Carney's making Canada a loser, can't escape U.S. dominance. But Carney stayed calm, commanding even. Said Canada wins through unity, not insults, building its own future.
And then the exit. Kimmel asked for final messages.
Yeah, final messages to Canadians, and Jordan just erupted, predicted Carney would crash and burn, said Canadians will become Americans because they can't survive without us.
Wow, that's extraordinary. And insulting.
Extremely. Carney's response was the total opposite, right? Talked about Canada as an idea of unity, freedom, and resilience, framed the election as their choice about their future, took the high road.
But Jordan wasn't done.
Nope, kept heckling, called Carney arrogant, said Canada was doomed, would be begging for America's help. Just relentless negativity.
How did Carney end it?
Pointed retort. Said Canadian unity is their strength, something Jordan will never understand. Reaffirmed self-determination. Strong defense of Canadian identity.
And then the walk-off.
Yeah.
Ripping off the mic, storming off, the stumble.
Yeah, the whole dramatic sequence. Very memorable, not exactly dignified. And Kimmel's pizza man comment afterwards just kind of capped it off.
While Carney stayed composed.
Completely. Delivered his final line, I believe in Canadians. Together we win. And the aftermath, the source notes, was immediate. Canadian media praising Carney, U.S. reaction split, social media buzzing.
Carney owned Jordan type stuff.
A lot of that, yeah. But also criticism of Jordan, some saying Kimmel was biased, a real mix.
So wrapping up this deep dive, key takeaways. For me, it's just the incredible contrast. Styles, policies, visions for Canada, the U.S. relationship. It was all laid bare.
Absolutely. You saw Carney aiming for that calm, competent, nationally proud image backed by policy talk. Jordan was, well, much more aggressive, theatrical almost, attacking Canada's strength, its leadership.
And those fundamental disagreements on the economy, borders, Canada's place in the world really highlighted different ideologies.
Definitely. Different views on national identity, too.
And hopefully for you listening, this deep dive gives you that quick but solid grasp of what went down, the core arguments, the personalities, without getting lost in all the noise. You get the essence of that encounter.
Yeah. And it does leave you thinking, doesn't it? This whole exchange, the drama, the reactions. What does it really signal about, political conversations today, both in Canada and between Canada and the U.S.?
Mm-hmm. Makes you reflect on things like sovereignty in today's world,
Yeah.
different economic paths, and maybe what kind of leadership works or doesn't work in the 21st century. Something to chew on.